to please be seated. Right. I declare this meeting open at 7 o'clock and welcome everyone to this public meeting. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here this evening. It is my prayer that as elected representatives, we speak respectfully and consider the needs of all current and future residents, as well as the impacts on the environment in which we live. Tonight, I would appreciate it if everyone present in this room allows us to make decisions free of interjections so that we can make the best possible decisions for the community. In particular, I would like to call out a few rules and expectations. First, we will have one person speaking at a time. The councillors will signal to me their interest and I will invite each of them to speak when appropriate. Secondly, the public has a right to attend this meeting as an observer. However, members of the public gallery are to observe in silence so as to allow the councillors to focus on decision making. Third, as per clause 5.31 of the Code of Meeting Practice, this council meeting is being recorded and it is being made available live via the council website. Only councillors and staff will be shown on camera. For the councillors participating in this meeting, I would also ask them under clause 5.30 to refrain from making potentially defamatory statements. 4. Clause 2.1 of the Code of Meeting Practice outlines the principle for all meeting attendees to treat each other with respect and to behave in a way that contributes to the orderly conduct of the meeting. 5. If any councillor would like to raise a point of order as per clause 15.1 of the Code of Meeting Practice, I ask that they turn on their microphone and say point of order. I will then pause the timer and allow the councillor to raise their concern before I rule on whether it is a valid point of order. Now for apologies. Are there any apologies? Councillor Kay?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I have an apology for Councillor Cedric Spencer, who has a prior family commitment.
Thank you.
And can I move that apology when the time comes? Thank you.
Yes. So before that, we have one more, Acting General Manager.
Mr. Mayor, we do have an apology from Councillor Pettit, who is an apology because of a health issue.
Okay. So I move that a motion to accept these two apologies be granted and a leave of absence. Moved by Councillor Nye, seconded by Councillor Ward. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Right. Apologies. Are there any by staff?
There are no apologies from staff, Mr. Mayor.
Are there any conflict of interest declarations for councillors? Acting General Manager, would you like to clarify?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There is a confidential memo from the corporate lawyer dated 5th of February today to councillors containing advice regarding council's code of conduct. Okay. So are there any conflict of interest declarations for staff? Well, Councillor Kay, yes?
Yes, I have a non-pecuniary, non-significant for NM1, as I sit on the LGNSW board and I'm also currently on the policy committee. So I'm going to leave the chambers on this occasion. Thank you. All right, thank you. So just to clarify, you will be here for MM1, but not for NM1. Thank you. Yeah, so MM1, not NM1. Yes, that is correct. Are there any conflict of interest declarations for staff?
There are no declarations from staff, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. And are there any documents circulated in the council's papers to be dealt with at the appropriate time during the meeting, other than the one already mentioned?
Only the one already mentioned.
Okay, thank you. Are there any reports to be considered in a closed meeting and not released to the press and public?
There are not, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you. Now we are off to Merrill Minute 1. I've written Merrill Minute 1. It is there for receiving and noting. Just checking to see if anyone would like to speak to it. If not, let us move that. All those in support of MM1, please raise your hands. And that is unanimous. We are now up to NM1 to consider the proposed changes to housing policy and planning controls by the New South Wales Government. This is moved by Councillor Smith.
Can I leave the room?
Oh, yes, Councillor Kay, you may now leave
I
the
think IT has to do that.
So we'll just wait to confirm that Councillor Kay has left. So this is NM1. It is moved by Councillor Smith and seconded by Councillor Wheatley. Councillor Smith, you may start.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. If I could just request that the staff bring up the notice of motion, also with just a couple of minor amendments on it to what was originally printed. And if you're ready, I would like to speak to this. Mr. Mayor, it pains me to be here in Council tonight to go up against the New South Wales State Government on this matter. Just to give you some background, cynically, the New South Wales State Government announced over the Christmas break the 31 stations, transport orientated development they call it, TOD for a better word, is what they announced over the Christmas break whilst everybody was taking a break, as we do in Australia. Summer, we get away with our families. What they were unaware of is the New South Wales Government put a very what you would call a very anti-planning policy in place called a SEP, which is a state government planning policy that overrules all of Ku-ring-gai's local planning rules. Myself, at the moment, well, not at the moment, I'll continue to call it, I see this as an authoritarian planning with absolutely no consultation with the councillors, no consultation with the staff, no consultation with the community. Ku-ring-gai has effectively lost all of its planning controls overridden by this SEP, which was done over a Christmas period, which I think at minimum is very poor. Council, to understand it, requested the supporting documents over the Christmas period, when maybe some of the New South Wales planning were there, to see how they came out with this decision. These documents that have made this particular government put in place this type of abhorrent planning, they called it cabinet in confidence. We've been denied to see that. Why? Why have we? That's something which we'll explore and we'll question a little bit later, I suppose. I think it's important to note that we've got our planning staff here and heritage people that are working with a 3-page document. 3-page document for some of the most serious planning that any New South Wales government has gone through New South Wales councils. So just to talk to it a bit, this anti-plan, I'll call it stage 1, shows 4 dobs on a map that looks like a 5-year-old put it there. These dobs on the map are on the rail line called Roseville, Killara, Linfield and Gordon train stations. These plans will absolutely decimate our heritage area. Most of the heritage that is in these areas is located around these stations that the New South Wales government just does not want to appear to acknowledge. We're going to be faced with 6 to 7 floors up to 400 metres, wiping out our heritage conservation areas, Just to put this in context, we're talking about a 1,000 square metre block, so we don't need to consolidate blocks anymore. A 1,000 square metre block, we can actually, a developer will be able to put up 30 units on a 1,000 square metre block. We're working with an FSR of 3 to 1. That is building 7 floors on this scale of FSR 3 to 1, is literally building boundary to boundary, towering over the top of single-level heritage bungalows if they remain. I think it's important to note that our HCAs were gazetted and approved by the New South Wales government that they now no longer want to take any notice of. Our tree canopy will be completely wiped out in these areas. Our wildlife corridor will be decimated. Stage 2 of the Minns and Scully anti-plan, 800 metres, 8 train stations and St Ives low residential areas are going to be massively affected. This is what we call manor houses, up to 9.5 highs in unit blocks. This is all in low residential area, by the way. Terraces at 9.5 metres high. I think it's important to note Mr Minns says that his inspiration came from Paris, this cookie-cutter approach, which will leave us with what I would describe as a Russian compound style of development. Stage 3, I better hurry up. All residents of R2 low density that have a 900 square metre, so this is the balance of Ku-ring-gai if we like. In our low density, we're going to have townhouses, 900 square metres, will be allowed to do 2 dual locks comprising of 4 residents. Our infrastructure can't cope. Traffic, roads, sewer. Our sewers are 1930s. We're over capacity. Mr Mayor, I will request that I just be given a little bit more time to...
Yeah, sure, go for it.
Our sewer was built in the 1930s, which was over capacity we're already currently over capacity with 50 incidences recorded in the last 12 months. Pipes bursting. Stormwater's built in 1930s, over capacity. Water pressure extremely poor. You listen to residents that are telling you they can't run 2 showers at once. Parking. We've got the roads. The tree. This is quite interesting. The tree canopy. Currently, Ku-ring-gai is fortunate enough to have a 30% tree canopy, and an estimate with the anti-planning, we will retain only 7%. This one I found unbelievable. New York, of all places, New York has currently got a 22% tree canopy, and it's recently endorsed to increase it to 30%. What does our Minns government want to do? They want to bring ours down to 7%. Completely opposite. We're going... So I think with that, I might request a couple of questions, if I may, through to Director Watson, just to put this type of development in perspective, that I think it's important that we get a good understanding what the residents of Ku-ring-gai are going to be exposed to. And actually in saying that, the residents of the Greater Sydney area that have got 31 train stations that are going to be affected with this same type of abhorrent development. So, to put in perspective, Director Watson, what type of development would we expect in a TOD zone, let's say, up to an 800 metre R2 low density, and then the rest of the R2 low density in Ku-ring-gai, if I may?
Through you, Mr Mayor. In the TOD zones themselves, Councillor Smith, you can expect buildings in the order of 6 to 7 stories. They would be, as you alluded to, floor space ratio 3 to 1. You will recall from some of the slides that we put up in the presentation on the 31st that it's the belief of our urban designers, our planners and some external urban designers we've commissioned that those two development standards don't work particularly well together. In fact, we showed a couple of mock-ups about what that would look like, and none of them, particularly when they're cumulative, but also when you're left with a single bungalow next door, none of them necessarily led to a particularly nice outcome. Now, you alluded to a lot of 1,000 square metres. The one we modelled with 30 units was in fact only about 810. So at 1,000 square metres, you would expect a slightly higher yield than than the 30 units. So the model you gave me is a little bit worse. So we would see that ordinarily a building of 6 to 7 stories, or a floor space ratio of 3 to 1, say, you might get a better, if you thought that was the outcome you're looking for, you'd probably get a better outcome if you were looking at a 9-story building rather than just a 6-story building, which you would end up with a bit more open space at the ground floor plane. Now, when you drop out to, and as you alluded to, there's 4 of those TOD stations, and within those TOD boundaries, there is in the order of 4,000 buildings that fall within heritage conservation areas or individually listed items. Now, when you go to a place like Kalara, something like 83% of the TOD catchment falls within within an HCA. Now, one of the objectives of the TOD was so that people could be within walking distance of shops, amenities, and a railway station. Now, anyone who's familiar with Kalara, for example, would be well understanding that there's very little by the way of shops or amenities there. There is a train station there, but there's not much more than a cafe. So the infrastructure that you would expect in a town centre the size of what is envisaged for Kalara, let's assume the full development occurs, would require a lot of commercial space, a couple of full-line supermarkets for which there is currently no capacity, and given that the TOD program does not provide for a master planning option or site consolidation, it will be very difficult to get any of the basic services and facilities that people in a town centre of 6,000 dwellings might expect. Now, the consultation on the 2 SEPs is being run separately, but certainly when you look at the 4 TOD sites, it's not just the TOD site. You've then got that 400 to 800. Depending on where you sit within that TOD site, you will again have buildings of varying scales, including some manor houses, including some dual occupancies, depending on what people want to do, but also some of those 6 to 7 story buildings. So again, you'll end up with a range of dwelling types in there of quite significant density. Now, Part 1 TOD program, there's 8 accelerated sites which have access to half a $500 million worth of funding and a master plan. Some of those are likely to have less yield and less density than a TOD site, plus a 400 or 800 low mid-rise SEP area around it. So you end up, it's quite feasible to think that you'll get more yield out of for the TOD stations than you do out of the TOD Part 1 stations. And I think that's been completely overlooked in the policy documentation. Now, in terms of the dual occupancy provisions, as you allude to, they would apply to all of the rest of the local government area that is, it doesn't apply to the conservation zone, but large parts of the LGA are normal residential zones. So if you look at, particularly from a biodiversity perspective rather than an urban form perspective, you would see greater impact, I would have thought, in the low density mid-rise SEP than coming from the TOD SEP. The figures you were giving, the 30% tree canopy cover on average down to 7%, that's quite stark, but you would have a much greater impact, I think, and our ecologists think, in the low to mid-rise SEP. Now, we presented some numbers about tree loss, and they're quite astounding numbers. I mean, they're in the tens of thousands. But what you could almost guarantee is that the trees that are most at risk, simply because of the amount of development you want to squeeze onto some of these sites, will be the larger trees, the more significant trees, and the older trees. And all of them collectively provide stepping stones. I think Jacob alluded to it in the presentation last week, from one national park to the other, east to west, and then of course north to south. So at the moment we have quite good crossover points and linkages between east and west. They will potentially virtually disappear over time. And as we all have also expanded upon in our submission, it's not just, the canopy cover is generally, not generally, it is trees over, I think we mentioned 3 metres, 310, doesn't matter. But there's a lot of vegetation sits below that, which isn't necessarily part of canopy cover. And it's a lot of that vegetation that will also disappear. And that provides a lot of places for flora, fauna, particularly birds, to migrate back and forward across the ridge line, which is effectively where the development is located. Sorry if that was a long-winded answer.
No, I appreciate it. I think it's very important that we actually get our head around what we're actually going to be faced with, and I think it's important considering that the state government has not gone out there to do it. I think it's important that we get it out there as much as we can. One of the things that concern me, and again, I might ask a question through you, Mr. Mayor, back through to Director Watson. We're talking about, they use nice words like manor houses. A manor house in Ku-ring-gai, currently what we consider as a manor house, can you just maybe expand on what that looks like?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, traditionally the idea of a manor house comes from England, but it would generally be a slightly larger version of the old Art Deco units, 2 on top, 2 on bottom. So we don't have very many, and there's one down in the back of Gordon down here, not far from the station, which is quite large, but it's on quite a large site, so you do get quite significant tree planting, tree coverage around it. But the manor houses that are currently being contemplated, the definition of manor house is being, I'll say, diluted for want of a better word, but it's more now likely to include more than just 2 by 2. It would be a low-scale residential flat building, so it could include much more than 4 units and have a bigger frontage. So we would see that as being, again, quite destructive or quite impactful on deep soil coverage in particular, and also with larger trees that might fall on the site.
So it would be fair to say that these manor houses are really a 2-storey block of units, is from what I've seen, what the pictures and descriptions I've seen of it, what the state government's providing. That's how I take it.
Yeah, I don't think that's an unfair description, Councillor Smith. The other thing I would say is that quite often with that type of development, as the concept or the typology is now evolving, you would quite often see a lot of underground car parking. So where at the moment our residential flat buildings would have their car parking, the traditional 5-storey stuff we do, under the footprint of the building, with the manor house approach, depending on your front and side setbacks, you might see a basement car parking levels expanding over much more of the site than we might have ordinarily expected, and certainly what we get from our 5-storey apartment buildings.
So just another question through you, Mr. Mayor, to Director Watson, just in relation to back onto our tree canopy again, with the lack of deep soil, when we're allowing such a concentrated development of the site, effectively that tree canopy, what does it look like? Like we're currently sitting at 30% and we go down to 7%. And then what does that do for our wildlife in this particular case?
I alluded to that in the last question, and I talked about removing the stepping stones where fauna can move from, and fauna and in fact flora can migrate from one parcel to another. And we did talk about the increasing likelihood of local extinctions of some species because they simply can't migrate from one parcel to the next. The other thing I would say is that the target in the tight area is 7% canopy cover, but it is highly unlikely that on demolition day all of the existing trees on a site are conveniently located where you ultimately want them. So it may be that you're going from 30 to 0, and then over time you might be lucky to get back to 7, but that would take a prolonged period of time. And because of the constrained nature of the site, or the quite expansive footprints, whichever you like to look at it, the trees that grow back are not likely to be as big as the trees that were removed to facilitate that development. So your 30% is diminished in size and scale, and would have to grow back over time.
Thank you.
Councillor Wheatley as seconder.
As Councillor Smith has brilliantly outlined, the brutal changes to the planning controls will be devastating on Ku-ring-gai. Being the chair of the Heritage Reference Committee, the state government housing policy impacts heritage significantly. Council's community satisfaction survey, which was conducted in 2021, found that 88% of residents believed it was important or very important for council to maintain Ku-ring-gai's unique visual character and identity. In terms of the importance of council's functions and services, 75% reported that council's role in protecting heritage building and conservation areas was also very important. Ku-ring-gai is fortunate to have a rich heritage inherited from past generations and protected through heritage listings for future generations. The conservation areas were listed over 10 years ago based on their confirmed heritage significance or worth keeping. The listing over the last 10 years in Ku-ring-gai's commitment to conserving its heritage is not about opposing development, it's about retaining and respecting what matters, linking history, placemakers and passing these on for future generations. All heritage matters in Ku-ring-gai and other areas, by its nature, are distinctly different as part of the story and history of each place. These differences and history need to be respected and incorporated into planning for new development, whether they be in Burwood or whether they be in Killara. The one-size-fits-all planning currently proposed does not reflect these local differences in two fundamental ways: removing the local heritage buildings and gardens and inserting new developments using the same formula of density. The proposal has a disproportionate impact on council's heritage. This is because of the local differences in Ku-ring-gai's heritage, low density build form and the location of early development along the railway line. Ku-ring-gai has also protected and retained its history, gardens and established trees as part of Ku-ring-gai's heritage. This differs to other areas. The proposal will potentially remove or impact nearly all of Ku-ring-gai's listed heritage areas and items, which is more than 4,000 sites. The proportion of impacted sites on these heritage listed is as high as 70% for the 800-metre radius around Killara Station, where 6 to 7 storey apartments and 2-storey multi-dwelling buildings are proposed. For Wahroonga, 65% of the land within the 800-metre station radius is heritage listed. The degree of density proposed in these listed low-scale heritage neighbourhoods are removed heritage protection will also be, there'll be an irreversible impact on them. In particular, this proposal will devalue Ku-ring-gai's 46 heritage conservation areas. Historic buildings and gardens once lost or built over can never be replaced. Good planning responds to all the needs of the community, including heritage, the environment and livability, alongside housing, so that these places continue as thriving communities for our generations to come. This is a turning point for the future of Ku-ring-gai's heritage and urban landscape. Alternatives are available for meeting housing needs with less heritage and environmental loss. Let's not waste the opportunity for something better, keeping our past and building a better future.
Thank you. Councillor Alec Taylor.
This morning, the New South Wales Treasurer was quoted in the Sydney Morning Herald. He said, "With a bit of goodwill from both sides, through the messiness of democracy, I think we can resolve a good outcome." I really admire that sentiment. I agree that we need goodwill and good democratic processes. Perhaps Minister Mookie could have a quiet word with Minister Scully and Premier Minns, because unfortunately the process employed on the new housing policies over the last couple of months has lacked both goodwill and democratic processes. The Transport-Oriented Development Policy, or TOD as it's affectionately known, was announced days before Christmas and is being implemented in April without community consultation. Good democratic processes would comprise genuine and constructive engagement by all parties, including council as outlined in the 2022 Housing Accord and genuine, not rushed community engagement. Not only do we need goodwill and democratic processes, but we also need good planning. Premier Minns has said he wants Sydney to look like Paris, and that's a lovely romantic idea, but is fundamentally flawed. Paris was planned centuries ago, and most of the housing was built 150 years ago. France's more modern policies are quite different. Right now, France is investing in upgrading their high-speed rail network to improve supply to less densely populated areas. Imagine if Gosford was 30 minutes away from Sydney, or Windsor, or Campbelltown. Imagine if Orange was an hour away instead of the 4-hour train trip that is right now. The TOD in particular is, as we heard from Councillor Smith and Wheatley, a one-size-fits-all approach to fixing the housing problem. It targets what it refers to as well-located metro and rail stations, but the only criteria considered for a good location appears to be train travel time. Our council has already provided detailed feedback on the inadequacies of the new housing policies, and I commend our team of experts for their hard work over the summer. Well done. Their analysis has highlighted many flaws with the policy, including catastrophic impacts on the tree canopy, traffic, parking, heritage, and many other vital elements for our community, as we heard from Director Watson and Councillor Smith. In choosing the 31 TOD stations, there was no consideration of the existing road network and traffic problems, like the massive bottlenecks on the highway and Boundary Road that already exist in Roseville, or the single road access to southwest Roseville at McLaurin Parade, or the dangerous three-way intersection at the Highway, Clanville and Shirley Roads. There was no consideration of the availability of car parking. There was no consideration of the presence of bushfire-prone land, as there is within 400 metres of Roseville Station. Good planning would consider all of these factors and more. Good planning would result in housing policies that preserve and enhance the tree canopy and don't destroy our history. Good planning would create the infrastructure required to enable expansion, like better rail networks and better arterial roads. Yes, we need goodwill, good democratic processes, and good planning to address this housing crisis. The state government needs to immediately abandon the TOD. Then all parties can constructively engage in good faith with proper and not rushed community consultation and robust and modern planning methodologies.
Next up, we have Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, if I may ask a question first through you to Director Watson. Director Watson, with stage 1, was it hurried or was the public given an opportunity to have the feedback? And what of stage 2?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Ward. A number of state policies in play here, Councillor Ward. The TODCEP is only being consulted with impacted councils, not the Board of Communion, despite the fact that it has quite widespread impact across large parts of the city. The low mid-rise housing set provisions, the statement of expectation or statement of intended effect, they both come out just before Christmas. There is a consultation period on that one that is open until mid to late February, like 23rd or something. That one, there is no implementation date, but we understand it's sometime in October. The TODCEP is intended to come into force sometime in April. We don't know the date. It's not always the case, but it's not uncommon for councils to in fact see full copies of the draft CEP to comment on. That was quite common in previous years. That certainly hasn't been the case with this one. And as alluded to by Councillor Smith, because there is so little detail in these documents, we have had to make a number of assumptions about what the provisions mean and where they in fact apply. So the maps we've prepared are in fact based on the words in the draft documentation, but the wordings in both documents are slightly different. So clearly two different authors, so they don't speak well to each other, despite the fact that in the 4 TOD sites, both policies will apply. And the thing that some people have missed is that I think it was about the 14th of December, some earlier changes that had been consulted on in relation to affordable housing were also brought into effect. So, and we don't know the exact interplay of those two policy documents, but we're assuming they apply to the tide. They would allow 30% floor space, height and floor space bonuses to any development where there's in perpetuity affordable housing. So rather than 67-storey buildings, we could be talking about 9 and 10-storey buildings. So 3 policy instruments, different levels of consultation. Together they really rewrite everyone in Sydney's understanding of how the planning system has worked for more than a decade. And you've got to read into that also the abandonment of the Greater Cities Commission as of the 1st of January this year, and the new draft district plans that they supposedly had prepared in late October. We certainly won't see before those policy documents are finalised, if at all. So it's a very clumsy and clunky approach to policy formulation at council level.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Director Watson. Mr. Mayor, I've received many letters from residents expressing their deep concern about the proposed TOD. Some of these concerns have risen from the developers knocking on doors on homes to sell off their property now so that they don't miss out. The New South Wales Government's proposed changes to planning controls are wide-ranging and will have extensive impacts, including overriding existing controls such as heritage, biodiversity and landscaping. Before I point out some of the matters we are concerned with, it is worth noting that I and most of residents of Gordon Ward are not entirely opposed to providing more homes. In fact, we support growth, but with proper planning, consultation with residents, and adhering to all other important environmental issues. This, we believe, will still yield the outcome the state government is seeking. The process of this TOD is one that is poor. It's unreasonable, it lacks consultation, and is damaging the whole of Sydney because it is generally a bad planning. We need a proper evaluation and analysis of what will be needed to support our growing communities to provide modern, adaptable and resilient infrastructure. We want to work with the state government so to that end, council staff worked very hard during that holiday period and met with Department of Planning, Housing and Infrastructure people on 16th of January regarding the TOD SCP, which concerns the 400-metre radius zones around Roseville, Linfield, Killara, Gordon railway stations. At this meeting and subsequent meetings with the department officers, the information provided was less than satisfactory because our questions were answered usually with "it is cabinet in confidence." There are conflicting messages as these officers were not sure whether the 30% affordable housing bonuses would apply in the TOD. However, we note that the TOD document released by the New South Wales Government in December says that these provisions will apply in the TOD. There is no negotiation on location that are included in the TOD SEPP. The list of stations selected has already been endorsed by Cabinet, we are told. They indicated that the 400-metre area around Todd Station is a radius as the crow flies from the station entrance, but there's uncertainty about how the station entrance is defined. This would need to be resolved, they say. Todd zones were simple rings around stations with a 400-metre radius that the zones did not take into consideration constraints such as topography, environmental constraints, heritage areas, and so on. Specific heritage items would have some protection, but they were clear that the heritage conservation areas would not be protected other than by the usual merit-based assessment. The New South Wales Government's priority is on housing, not on heritage. The TOD will be its own SEPP, not included as part of another and will become effective from April 2024. Let me highlight some other specific issues. You've heard from our fellow councillors here. Councils were given a very short notice timeframe to respond and released during Christmas holidays. It is a rubber stamp location on all Sydney, not only Ku-ring-gai. No consideration was given to heritage site, loss of our history, no environmental and sustainability consideration, no infrastructure consideration, 120-year pipes, sewage systems. I am a former chair of the flood committee, so I'm acutely aware of all those issues. The impact of canopy over the lack of design standards, tree canopy as low as 15%, tree targets will be reduced from 50 to 7% for mid-high-rise housing, leads impact on biodiversity, wildlife and climate change. Trees play a vital role in mitigating urban heat, improving air quality and reducing carbon dioxide. Rising population impacts on existing infrastructure. No consideration for additional traffic movement on already overcrowded roads. West side of the highway in Gordon already has a deficit of open space parks. There's no provision for this. No plan for more schools, hospital, roads, childcare. No plans for bushfire. Types of dwelling proposed are to be cheaper. We fail to understand how this could be possible. Building costs are high, skilled workers are limited, and regardless of economies of scale. May I have a couple more minutes? Thank you.
Just one more minute.
Overall environment and the impact on mental and physical health has been totally overlooked. In our mind, the developers will gain and individual people will lose. We fail to understand how the proposed reforms will solve the issue of housing affordability. This is a one-size-fits-all approach for the whole of Sydney. I urge the government to explore alternative solutions to work towards a plan that benefits everyone and not just those cashing developers. We are not at odds with the state government, but we need the government to work with all councils and the people, particularly older people, who are our nation builders. Through their hard work, we enjoy so much so freely. Thank you.
Next up, we have Councillor Lennon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As we've heard, this motion is not about Ku-ring-gai. This is about Sydney, it's about New South Wales. It's about the people who live here today and the people who will live here in the future, the people who want to live here. Because no local government area is walled in. No one has a moat, people move in and out. I spent the first couple of years of my life living in another part of Sydney. We came to Ku-ring-gai when I was 2 years old. I left again in my early 20s, came back 9 years later, the month before my second child was born. And that's a common story. So as we talk about Ku-ring-gai, remember, this is not just about the people here, about people moving around and giving people options, giving people choices. And interestingly, we've heard a lot about Meadowbank lately. I spent 9 years living in Meadowbank. We still own that property. My middle daughter lives there. It's a wonderful area. I really like it. And I'm glad that when I was living in Meadowbank, Gordon was here for me to move to afterwards. So as we think about these issues, think about Sydney as a whole and giving people choice. At different stages in life, we want to live in different properties. We want to live in different styles of accommodation, different parts of Sydney for many different reasons. So if we're going to talk about housing choice, we need a city that has variety. A state government that wants to make everywhere the same is going to deny people choices. I mean, if everywhere's the same, if my middle daughter wants to move on to Meadowbank, what's the point if everywhere's the same? Where would we want to move on? We need this variety. And we've heard a lot about Paris. Paris is a wonderful place. But we've got Paris. At the moment, we've got Sydney. And if we lose Sydney and replace it with anywhere else, the world has lost something. And much of what we hear tonight is about heritage. Heritage is valuable even if you don't own it. You don't need to own a beautiful house to value it. It's part of your heritage, it's part of your culture. If you value culture, you value heritage. For all the reasons that we value culture, we value heritage. And we've heard some comments over the last few days about who might be valuing that heritage. I've been and had the great pleasure of spending time in places like China, Malaysia, Thailand, Samoa and elsewhere. And I've appreciated the heritage that I've seen there, the homes, the buildings and so forth. I'm glad they're there. I don't need to own them. And we should not assume that people coming to this country don't value what we've got. Many do. Some examples come to mind, but I'd particularly like to share with you one particular couple who was born in Malaysia, Chinese wife, came to Australia some time ago, bought a house in Killara. And they'd never heard of Ethel Turner. they'd never heard of the book Seven Little Australians. It meant nothing to them. But the house they moved into was Ethel Turner's home, where she wrote Seven Little Australians. And the enthusiasm and the passion that they found for that heritage, living in that house and sharing with it, was wonderful. And they kindly opened their home up to a Ku-ring-gai Heritage Festival last year. And I had the pleasure of being there. And I suggest that if Chris Minns and Paul Scully do not understand heritage and don't value it, spend time with people who do. Because it's a wonderful thing. You don't need to own it to value it and to enjoy it. And all over Sydney, we've got wonderful heritage all over New South Wales. In Haberfield, there are homes I'll never see. But you like the heritage that's there. In Lilyfield, in Parramatta, in Paddington, all over the place, there's valuable, wonderful homes. And we are enriched by having them there and by giving people choices about where they live. And much, of course, we've also heard about tonight in terms of housing is the natural environment. We're not just economic units or political units to be housed in boxes in the air. We're human beings with feelings and aspirations. And the quality of life comes from being grounded, from having trees close by, from having the opportunity to have soil underfoot. I was told in the last week that being grounded means having your bare feet on soil. That's a quality of life issue that gets back to us as being human beings with human feelings and human aspirations. And that's something that we enjoy in many, many parts of Sydney. And we need to keep that for the people there now and for the people in the future, to give them the choices and the opportunities. And just like I had 9 years living in a home unit in Meadowbank, I'm glad now to be in Gordon with the soil underfoot. And I want to make sure that we keep those choices for the people of this state now and into the future. So I think this is a wonderful motion, and I'm thrilled that we've got it before us. And I hope to work with councils all over Sydney, where we have a common interest in the quality of people's lives now into the future. Let's see what we can do together, cooperatively, for the interest of the people right across the state. Thank you.
I will now speak to the motion. Some media outlets pitch this debate as NIMBY versus YIMBY, but they completely miss the point. This is not about NIMBYism, it is about infrastructure and planning. As councillors in New South Wales, we are tasked not just to provide homes, but also to provide our residents with a great place to live. Our residents deserve to have quick access to jobs, education, shops, services, parks, libraries, and amenities. Our residents deserve to have access to these, whether on foot, bike, public transport, or car. And with climate change, our residents deserve to live in well-designed, resilient suburbs that keep them cool and safe in the summer. However, if implemented in the current form, the state's rushed housing policies will fail to provide New South Wales residents with what they deserve. And if you speak to anyone who has any experience with running cities or projects, they will say that the failure to plan carefully can lead to expensive mistakes, some which may be permanent and others which are too expensive to reverse. It will leave New South Wales with a miserable legacy, making other states look more attractive than ours. The people of New South Wales deserve better than this, and I encourage each council to assess the impacts and cost of delivering infrastructure while preparing their submissions to the government. Specific to Ku-ring-gai, these housing policies fail on three key fronts. First, on infrastructure. While proximity to train stations is important, the housing policies fail to acknowledge existing problems with traffic congestion, stormwater, and access to amenities. On traffic bottlenecks, these are issues which we bring to the state government regularly, and they fall on deaf ears. In Roseville ward alone, I can name multiple intersections at Boundary, Archbold, Pacific, and Lady Game, which residents frequently complain about, but each time we approach the state to fix the bottlenecks, they don't give a toss. They believe it is perfectly fine for local residents to wait 20 minutes at a traffic light, when vehicles on the state road are guaranteed 2 minutes max. They deny there are problems with going to school or work at current population levels, let alone future. On stormwater, Ku-ring-gai's ageing network of public and private stormwater systems was never designed for current population levels, let alone future. Our studies show that the considerable cost of upgrading these pipes is not achievable with the current state-governed funding model, and I doubt developer contributions will be sufficient to remedy. We already see overland flooding because our pipes are at capacity. On access to amenities, Council acknowledges that the apartment dwellers of tomorrow need close proximity to open space, libraries, and other amenities, and that is why we sought to deliver in partnership with the state government in Linfield. Due to state-imposed procurement laws, market forces, and COVID, the process of delivering the Linfield Village Hub took over a decade, plus significant public and private sector spend, and we nearly got there. We were about to sign the dotted line on 12th of December when the state government, without consultation, illegally announced the withdrawal of $9.8 million and put the project on the rocks. Cost escalations have set back delivery of this project by years, and the few hundred homes linked to this project now have no prospect of being delivered this decade. Building great places to live requires careful planning and serious infrastructure, and I currently have no faith that the state government will deliver. In particular, Roseville and Killara do not have the infrastructure, services, or master planning in place to match the population of Chatswood. Yet, this is what the housing policies seek to achieve. The state government must allow time to plan before letting developers rip. Plus, I don't understand why our train stations are included in the TOD when others like Summerhill and Lewisham, which are 10 minutes closer to the city and also supported by light rail, are excluded. The details are hidden as cabinet in confidence. On the topic of climate resilience, numerous studies show that suburbs with tree canopies stay cooler than those without. The state government knows this and has a target of 40% urban canopy by 2036. But once again, these proposed housing policies with 7% deep soil planting in town centres and 15 to 20% targets elsewhere lead to hotter suburbs which put residents' lives at risk. On the topic of heritage and local character, other councils have already covered this in detail. So Ku-ring-gai, like all other councils, must play a role in delivering housing for the future. But let's not do this in haste, with consequences that are impossible to reverse. We must not follow the underpants norms. I invite state and local governments to plan infrastructure for great spaces before delivering on the housing. So, Councillor Smith, do you have some questions?
Yes, I do, Mr. Mayor. If I may ask a question through you to Director Watson. Director Watson, if this TOD was to proceed in these 4 locations that's been nominated, have we got the green space that would be required for this type of development?
Through you, Mr. Mayor.
In these locations?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the short answer to that is no. It's a very complex story to tell, but the open space acquisition strategy we've been implementing for about 15 years is based on provision of new parks for incoming residents at the same rate that already existed for the existing resident population. So what that does is effectively bake in under provision relative to what you might provide in a greenfields area. Now, the thing that has become increasingly, in fact, extremely evident in a very short period of time is that we have purchased in the order of 43, 45 properties, it doesn't matter, over the last 10 or 15 years, and slowly been converting them to parks as we get all the properties in a row. But because of people's expectations arising from these 2 policies, we have had 3 acquisitions or 3 negotiations effectively terminated in the last 6 weeks. So we would see that in some cases, implementation of the balance of our current open space acquisition strategy may cost us upwards of 2.5 to 3 times more than we were already planning, and we don't have the funds for that. And we certainly would not necessarily have the funds to provide additional open space for incoming residents, particularly when there is greater expectation among residents about the price of land, no requirement for planning of any sort at all. So it's not as if council can go in and identify sites for acquisition as easily as we have done in the past. And with, some of the acquisitions we've done, we've been looking for 3 or 4 properties in a row. We've never done it by compulsory acquisition. It can take, 10, it's not uncommon for 10 years between the first and the last acquisition. And we've always been sitting there patiently on the sideline waiting to be, the buyer of first choice when people decide it's in their best interest to sell. You could have 3 or 4 properties in a row. You could have 2 on one side, 1 on the other, and the one in the middle decides, I'm going to go and build a 7 or 8 story apartment block. So you're going to be sitting there for a number of years, and you can have your plans pulled out from under you. So we would say it's unlikely that we would be able to provide open space of the type that we've been providing over the last 15 years or so.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think, again, I might ask you another question because I think it's very important to note that we're not anti-medium to high density. I think in Ku-ring-gai, we've actually done quite a lot of it. So I think it's important that I ask Director Watson a question in regards to our medium and high density, what that currently looks like when it's sitting on a block at the moment, what type of FSRs we're dealing with, is because I think there can be quite a misunderstanding. People might have the thought that it's going to be a deep soil around the site, trees. So what type of FSRs are we currently working with at the moment on our current LEP?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I'll focus on the 5-storey residential apartment buildings, Councillor Smith, if that's okay with you.
That's fine.
They're generally 5-storey. They're of a floor space ratio 1.3 to 1, and we generally get side and rear setbacks in the order of 6 metres. So by the time you get 2 of these together, you've got 6 metres on either side, 12 metres in total. We, under our DCP, one of our most precious planning controls, even though it's only in the DCP, is the 50% deep soil provision. So what that does is it means when you've got 12 metres between buildings, front, side and rear, at least, and 50% deep soil, you can get large trees planted inside and rear setbacks of these apartment buildings. And a 5-storey apartment building, and it might go to 6, but generally 5, is sufficiently low height that over time you can get large canopy trees that effectively go to at least and beyond the roof line. Now, what we're talking about under the new model is 3 to 1 with what looks like, in order to make 3 to 1 6 stories work, potentially no side setbacks at all. You effectively end up with party wall arrangements.
So it's
very
effectively
limited
box.
front and side. Yeah, very limited front and side setbacks. So it's not as if you can. I mean, without the requirement for consolidation, you're likely to get basement car parks over the whole of the site rather than 50% of the site, with a minimum frontage of 18, 20 metres, whatever it is. You're going to end up with a double driveway going into basement parking. That's if you can even get a workable basement car park arrangement in a site that's 18 metres wide, which is very difficult. It's all ramp and aisle and not a lot of car space. So you would end up with a completely different apartment format to the one that has been, albeit from some people's perspective, a little bit controversial, but at least over time we do get large canopy trees. And we're starting to see that now, particularly north up the highway, but increasingly down around Millray Road and further south. So we would say it's a set of planning controls that have been developed to suit the circumstances of Ku-ring-gai, albeit, like I say, not everybody necessarily likes them. They work far better than we think 3 to 1 6 stories is going to.
Thank you, Director Watson.
So there being no other speakers, I'd invite Councillor Smith to sum up.
Mr. Mayor, you will see that I was actually scribbling down notes as people are speaking, and they gave just too many reasons, too many reasons why this can't be supported. So I'm actually just going to sort of go over a couple of them. I think it's important that Ku-ring-gai not be known as a NIMBY council. We're not a NIMBY council. We take our fair share of planning. We deliver on our planning targets. I think that's important to recognise. I think that anybody that's driven through Ku-ring-gai in the last couple of years will notice a lot of mid to high density buildings throughout Ku-ring-gai. So I think that's more than demonstrating that we're playing our part in this. I think that the way the New South Wales government is playing class warfare on this is very disappointing. We're not playing class warfare with anybody. We are welcoming to work with any other council or councillors in trying to resolve this situation for New South Wales, because I believe that it really needs to be taken. We've even got a person from another council here this evening thanking us very much for bringing this to their attention, and they'll be taking it further in that council they work in. I think it's also important to recognise that we all live in this state. We all should respect one another's communities. I respect Meadowbank in its community. I think that we welcome delivering planning that we need to do. We know we need to do it, but we want to do it in a collaborative approach, not the way that this has been done. And I think it's important that the New South Wales State Government is prepared to work with us, because we know we've got a better understanding of Ku-ring-gai, just the same as somebody in Canterbury Bankstown will know what's better for their particular area. And I think that is very important to recognise. We've all got different reasons. It can't be the one size fits all, which has been said here tonight. I think it's also important to note that we are starting to, we look like we woke up other areas to what was going on, because they're jumping on board. I was very comforted in regards to a Sydney Morning Herald article that was written on Sunday by Andrew Taylor, which I think describes what we and other councillors are going through. We've got somebody like Darcy Byrne that's jumped on board. We've got North Sydney Council that's jumped on board. So we've got the Inner West Council, we've got North Sydney Council, we've got some further out West councils. We've spoken to the staff. We're happy to share the documents. We're not just trying to protect ourselves. We think this is a poor decision from this New South Wales State Government. So I think that we're all in this together. I even welcome Premier Minns to come down, take a drive, come down, visit the council, bring Mr Scully along, have a look, see what Ku-ring-gai's like. We're not NIMBYs. If he drives along the highway, he'll recognise straight away that we have been taking in a number of development. We've got some serious issues that we've described here tonight. We've got our infrastructure that can't cope with it. The roads can't cope with it. Our heritage hasn't been recognised. We're potentially on this type of development going to lose our identity, which is important. That to me is anti-planning. We need people that are going to come in here. We need New South Wales Labor government, or I don't care what government, the New South Wales State Government to come in here and work with somebody like Director Watson that intimately knows Ku-ring-gai. We've got heritage experts that know what our heritage is. I think this one-size-fits-all doesn't work, and for those reasons, I hope that we get everybody's support here this evening, which I think I'm very confident about, and thank you for that.
So I would now like to put NM1 to the vote. All those in favour, please raise your hands. That is unanimous. There being no further business, I would like to thank councillors and staff. I would also like to thank members of the public for their attendance. The webcast of this meeting will be available on the council website, and minutes will be published within the next 2 working days. I declare the meeting closed at 8:04 p.m. Thank you.